The night began like any other. Quiet, forgettable, wrapped in the soft illusion of safety. The kind of night people never remember, until it becomes the only thing they can't forget. Rain tapped gently against the windows of the Miller house, a modest 2-story home tucked into a calm suburban street, where porch lights glowed like sleepy fireflies. Inside, the house breathed slowly, alive with a subtle sound of routine. Water pipes ticking, a clock humming in the hallway, the refrigerator clicking on and off like it always did. Emily Miller sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling through her phone, unaware that this was the last moment of normalcy she would ever experience. She was 27, a graphic designer working remotely, recently engaged, and by every definition, ordinary. That ordinariness was her armor. Nothing bad happened to people like her. That's what she believed. That's what everyone believes, right until the moment it happens. Downstairs, her father, Robert Miller, rinsed his coffee mug and placed it carefully in the sink, as if order itself could protect him. A former high school history teacher, Robert was a man of patterns. Same mug, same routine, same time every night. He checked the locks. Front door, back door, garage. Then pause, hand still on the deadbolt, listening. Silence. He exhaled and turned off the kitchen light. In the living room, Emily's mother, Susan, folded a blanket over the arm of the couch. The TV murmured softly, some late-night crime documentary she wasn't really watching. She shook her head at the irony, unaware that real life was quietly lining up to eclipse fiction. At exactly 10:47 p.m., the power flickered. Just once. Enough to make the lights dim. Enough to make Susan glance at the ceiling. Enough to make Robert stop mid-step on the stairs. "Storm's getting worse," Susan said casually. Robert nodded, though something about the flicker unsettled him. Power outages were rare in this neighborhood. The infrastructure was new, reliable, predictable. Predictable things don't suddenly fail. Upstairs, Emily felt the vibration more than she saw it. Her phone screen dimmed, then returned to normal. She frowned, locked her phone, and stood up. Tomorrow was a big day. Client presentation, engagement photos, life moving forward. She changed into pajamas, brushed her teeth, and glanced at herself in the mirror. She smiled. It would be the last real smile she ever made. At 11:02 p.m., a sound came from outside. Not loud, not obvious, just wrong. It was a kind of sound the brain tries to rationalize. A branch snapping, a trash can tipping, a stray animal moving through the dark. Robert heard it first. He stopped at the top of the stairs, one hand gripping the railing, heart suddenly thumping harder than it should have. He listened again. Nothing. Probably the wind, he muttered, more to convince himself than anyone else. But the wind didn't explain the faint shadow that moved past the living room window. Susan noticed it too. "Did you see that?" she asked. Robert turned. "See what?" Before she could answer, the motion sensor light outside the house clicked on, flooding the front yard with white light. Empty. Susan let out a nervous laugh. "Guess we're jumpy tonight." Robert didn't laugh, because he knew something she didn't. The front yard had been empty, but the shadow had been too close to the glass to belong to the street. At 11:11 p.m., the first mistake was made. Robert locked the front door. He did not check the basement. The basement door had been unlocked since the afternoon, when a delivery man dropped off a package and asked to use the restroom. Robert had been distracted, signing a form, chatting politely. He never saw the man's face clearly, and he never relocked the door. Now, below the house, beneath the quiet footsteps and the hum of electricity, something shifted. A presence that did not belong. The basement air was cold and damp, smelling faintly of concrete and old cardboard. A figure stood motionless in the darkness, listening to the house above. Every footstep, every breath, every careless assumption of safety. This wasn't a random act. This wasn't a mistake. This night had been planned. At 11:18 p.m., Emily lay in bed, scrolling again, earbuds in, music low. Her phone buzzed with a text from her fiancé. "Miss you already." She smiled and typed back, "See you tomorrow. Love you." She hit send. That message would later be read in a courtroom, projected onto a screen. dissected word by strangers trying to understand how a life could end so suddenly. Downstairs, Susan turned off the TV and stretched. "I'm heading to bed," she said. Robert nodded. "I'll be right up." He stood alone in the living room, lights dimmed, listening to the house settle. That was when he heard it. A floorboard. Not upstairs. Not outside. Below. The basement floorboard creaked slowly, deliberately, as if someone had shifted their weight. Robert froze. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to run, to shout, but fear doesn't always come with clarity. Sometimes it comes like glue, holding you in place. "Hello?" he called out, his voice betraying him. Silence answered back. Then the basement door handle turned. Slowly, deliberately. The sound was soft, almost polite. Robert took a step back, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might tear through his chest. His mind raced through possibilities. Burglar, animal, imagination. But none of them fit the weight of what he felt in that moment. This wasn't someone trying to get out. This was someone who had already been inside. Upstairs, Emily pulled out one earbud. She thought she heard her father's voice. Then she heard something else. A scream. Short, sharp, cut off. Her blood ran cold. "Dad!" she shouted, throwing off the blanket. No answer. Only the sound of heavy footsteps moving through the house below her. Not running. Walking. Confident. The kind of footsteps that didn't belong to someone afraid of being caught. Emily grabbed her phone, hand shaking, and dialed 911. It rang once. Twice. Then the line went dead. The power flickered again. And went out completely. The house fell into darkness. Somewhere below, a door creaked open, and the night that changed everything finally revealed itself. The darkness didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly, like a living thing, swallowing corners first, then hallways, then certainty. Emily stood frozen in her bedroom, phone pressed uselessly to her ear, staring at the doorway as if the darkness itself might step through it. Her heart slammed against her ribs so violently it hurt. Somewhere below, something moved again. A chair scraped lightly across the floor. Glass clinked. The sound were careful, controlled. Whoever was down there was not panicking. She backed away from the door, every step slow, deliberate, terrified of making noise. Her mind screamed at her to run, to hide, to jump out the window. But fear fractured her thoughts into useless pieces. She locked her bedroom door. The click of the lock felt laughably small. Emily moved to the closet, pulling it open just enough to slip inside. She crouched behind hanging clothes, knees pressed to her chest, breath shallow and fast. Her phone screen was the only light left in the world. She tried 911 again. No signal. No bars. Nothing. The music of rain outside grew louder, pounding against the roof like applause for something she couldn't see. Then, faintly from downstairs, Susan screamed. It was not like the scream in movies. It wasn't dramatic or drawn out. It was raw, animal, shortened by terror. Emily bit down on her fist to keep from screaming too. Tears flooded her eyes, blurring the phone screen. Her mother's voice cut off abruptly, replaced by a dull thud. Something heavy hit the floor. Then silence. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, shaking violently. Every muscle in her body begging her to do something. Anything. But fear had turned her into a statue. Seconds stretched into eternity. She counted her breaths without realizing it. 1, 2, 3. Footsteps began on the stairs. Slow, unrushed. Each step creaked under the weight of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Emily covered her mouth, her whole body trembling now, teeth chattering uncontrollably. The footsteps stopped halfway up the stairs. She imagined him standing there, listening, smiling in the dark. A floorboard upstairs creaked. Not hers. The footsteps continued. Closer. A shadow passed beneath the crack of her bedroom door. Someone stood outside it. She could see their feet. Dark shoes, wet with rain, positioned calmly as if this were just another room in their own home. The door handle turned. Locked. There was a pause. Emily's lungs burned. She felt lightheaded, dizzy, on the edge of blacking out. The handle turned again, harder this time. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps. Polite, Her stomach twisted violently. Whoever this was didn't need to force the door. He wasn't in a hurry. That terrified her more than rage ever could. "Emily," a man's voice said quietly. Her blood turned to ice. He knew her name. "I know you're in there." The voice continued, calm and measured. "Your parents are very worried." Emily sobbed silently, pressing her face into her knees. Her phone vibrated in her hand. One bar flickered to life. She didn't think. She just dialed again. This time, the call connected. 911, what's your emergency? Emily tried to speak, but nothing came out except broken gasps. "Ma'am," the operator said urgently, "I need you to stay calm." "There's someone in my house," Emily whispered. He hurt my parents." The voice outside the door changed. His politeness vanished. The handle rattled violently as the door shook under a sudden kick. "Emily!" he shouted now, the mask slipping. "Open the door." The operator's voice sharpened. "Ma'am, where are you located?" Maplewood Drive." Emily choked. Please hurry." Another kick. The door frame cracked. "Help is on the way," the operator said. "Stay on the line." The door splintered inward on the next blow. Emily screamed. She bolted from the closet just as the door burst open, with cracking loudly as it slammed against the wall. A figure filled the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, face half hidden by shadow. He moved faster than she expected. Emily ran for the window, heart pounding, lungs screaming for air. Fingers brushed the latch. A hand grabbed her hair. Pain exploded across her scalp as she was yanked backward, crashing onto the floor. Her phone skidded away, the operator's voice still shouting from it. She clawed at the carpet, screaming, kicking, fighting with everything she had left. The man cursed under his breath, struggling to control her thrashing limbs. "Stop," he hissed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." He slammed her head against the floor. Once, twice. The world tilted violently. Her vision blurred, sounds stretching and warping like they were underwater. Somewhere, far away, sirens wailed. The man froze. His grip tightened. "Damn it," he muttered. Emily tried to crawl away, but her arms wouldn't respond. She tasted blood. Her eyelids felt impossibly heavy. The man leaned down close to her face. She could smell him, rain, sweat, metal. "This wasn't how it was supposed to go," he said, almost to himself. Then he stood, grabbed something from the bed, and ran. The front door slammed. Silence rushed back in, thick and suffocating. Emily lay motionless on the floor, barely conscious, staring at nothing. The sirens grew louder now, closer. Red and blue lights flashed through the broken window, painting the walls in frantic colors. She tried to speak. She tried to move. Darkness closed in. And then nothing. The first police car arrived at 11:36 p.m. Officer Daniel Hayes stepped out cautiously, rain soaking through his uniform as he took in the scene. The front door hung open, swinging slightly in the wind. The porch light flickered weakly. "Dispatch, I'm on scene," he said into his radio. "Possible home invasion. Door open." He drew his weapon and moved inside. The house smelled wrong, metallic, heavy, unmistakable. Blood stained the living room carpet, leading toward the kitchen. Susan Miller lay motionless near the couch, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, throat slashed so deeply it barely looked real. Hayes swallowed hard. Jesus. In the kitchen, Robert Miller was slumped against the counter, blood pooled beneath him. His chest didn't move. Upstairs, another officer shouted, "We've got a survivor." Emily was rushed to the hospital, unconscious, her head wrapped in gauze, her clothes soaked in blood that wasn't all hers. Paramedics worked frantically, shouting vitals, fighting to keep her alive. She flatlined once on the way. They brought her back. By morning, the neighborhood was unrecognizable. Police tape cordoned off the Miller house as news vans lined the street. Neighbors stood in clusters, whispering, crying, shaking their heads in disbelief. Nothing like this ever happens here. They were such a nice family. I heard the killer knew them. Detectives combed through the house inch by inch. There were no signs of forced entry. No clear fingerprints. The basement door was open. Detective Lorachin stared down the stairs, jaw tight. He was already inside, she said quietly. They found muddy footprints leading to the back door. Then nothing. The rain had washed everything else away. No weapon, no suspect, no motive, just two bodies and one survivor who hadn't woken up. Emily opened her eyes 3 days later. White ceiling, machines beeping, the smell of antiseptic. Her throat burned. Her head throbbed like it might split open. A nurse noticed her stirring and rushed over. "Emily, can you hear me?" Emily tried to nod. Pain shot through her skull. Tears slid down her temples. "Your parents," the nurse began carefully. Emily's scream echoed down the hospital hallway. She would survive, but survival came with a price. Because Emily Miller was the only witness, and she couldn't remember his face. Not his eyes, not his voice, not even how he got inside. Only one thing remained clear in her fractured memory. He had called her by name, and he had said, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. The police didn't know it yet, but the crime everyone thought was random was anything but. Emily's dreams were broken things. They came in fragments. Faces without features, hands without bodies, voices that echoed but never stayed long enough to be understood. Every time she slept, she fell back into that house, into the darkness, into the sound of footsteps climbing the stairs. She woke up screaming more nights than not. The hospital room became a cage of white walls and whispered conversations. Doctors spoke softly around her, as if volume alone might shatter what little was holding her together. Detectives waited patiently at first, then anxiously, then with quiet frustration, as days turned into weeks, and Emily's memory refused to cooperate. She remembered pain. She remembered fear. She remembered the certainty that the man in her house had not been surprised by her presence. But his face? Blank. Detective Lorachin sat beside Emily's bed one afternoon, notebook resting in use on her lap. She had learned that pushing too hard only made Emily shut down. Trauma didn't respond to interrogation. It recoiled from it. "Do you remember anything new?" Laura asked gently. Emily stared at the window, rain streaking down the glass just like that night. "He wasn't angry," she said suddenly. Laura leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "He wasn't frantic. He didn't panic when I screamed. He didn't panic when the police were coming." Emily swallowed. It was like he was disappointed, like something went wrong. Laura wrote that down. Disappointment. That word stayed with her long after she left the hospital. 3 miles away, in a cheap motel on the edge of town, a man sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his hands. They were clean now, scrub raw. Still, he could feel it. The resistance of bone, the warmth of blood, the way life had drained so quickly once he applied pressure in the right place. He flexed his fingers slowly, methodically, grounding himself. This was not how it was supposed to end. He had planned every detail. The timing, the weather, the layout of the house. He had watched the family for weeks, memorizing routines, habits, patterns. He knew when the lights went out. He knew which doors were checked and which ones weren't. The basement door had been the weak point. It always was. What he hadn't planned for was a girl waking up so quickly. He hadn't planned on panic escalating the way it did. He hadn't planned on sirens arriving early. And he definitely hadn't planned on her surviving. The man stood and walked to the bathroom mirror. He studied his reflection carefully. Average face, forgettable features, the kind of man no one remembered twice. That had always been his advantage. "You rushed," he told himself quietly. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes led to witnesses. Emily was released from the hospital 21 days after the attack. The house was gone, boarded up, sealed, condemned by the city until the investigation concluded. Emily didn't ask what happened to it afterward. She couldn't imagine ever standing inside those walls again. She moved in with her aunt in another state, far from Maplewood Drive, far from familiar streets that now felt hostile. Still, distance didn't bring peace. Night followed her everywhere. She began therapy twice a week. Sometimes she spoke. Sometimes she sat in silence for an hour, fingers twisting in her lap, eyes unfocused. Her therapist never forced her to talk. "Your brain is protecting you," Dr. Reynolds explained calmly. "Memory loss after trauma isn't weakness. It's survival." "But what if I'm protecting him?" Emily whispered. That question haunted her. Detective Chin wasn't convinced the crime was random. There was no theft, no signs of struggle downstairs beyond what the killer wanted to leave. The parents had been dealt with efficiently, too efficiently for a panicked intruder. This was someone experienced, someone controlled. She reopened old files, looking for patterns, home invasions that ended in violence, cases that went cold because nothing connected them. It took weeks, but eventually something surfaced. A murder in Ohio, another in Pennsylvania. Different families, different houses, same detail. Basement access, no forced entry. Parents killed first. A younger family member surviving, barely. Laura felt her pulse quicken. Serial behavior wasn't about repetition for comfort. It was about repetition for meaning. The killer was trying to complete something, and every time something interfered, he moved on, leaving unfinished work behind. Emily wasn't the first survivor. She was the first one who lived long enough to remember. The man checked out of the motel under a different name. He always used different names. He drove for hours, letting the highway swallow him whole, radio off, thoughts sharp and focused. He needed time. He needed distance. He needed to correct the error. Emily Miller had disrupted the pattern, but patterns could be reset. He already knew where she was. That knowledge calmed him more than he expected. Emily began to remember small things, not the attack itself, but moments around it, sounds, sensations, a smell she couldn't place, a phrase that echoed at random times. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Sometimes it felt like he was still speaking it directly to her. One evening, as she sat alone in her aunt's living room, a memory surfaced suddenly and violently. Not an image, but a feeling, recognition. She gasped, clutching the armrest. Dr. Reynolds had told her memory often returned emotionally before visually, fear before faces. Emily understood now. The man hadn't just known her name. He had known her. Detective Chin called her the next morning. "Emily," she said carefully, "we think this may be bigger than just your case." Emily's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" "We think the man who attacked your family has done this before." Emily closed her eyes. "And he didn't finish," Laura continued, "which means there's a chance he'll try again." Emily's voice trembled. "With who?" There was a pause. "With you?" The line went quiet. Emily stared at her reflection in the dark television screen. For the first time since that night, fear gave way to something else. Anger. If he was coming back, then she wasn't going to be the same girl hiding in a closet. Somewhere on the road, a man smiled faintly to himself. The night had changed everything. But the story wasn't over yet. Emily's new life was a fragile illusion. Every sound outside her window, every shadow passing her door, made her flinch. Even the smallest noises, an engine revving, a dog barking, the mail slot rattling, triggered flashes of that night, replaying her mind like a relentless film reel. She could not pause. She carried a notebook everywhere now, scribbling down memories a therapist told her to catch before they slipped away. Sometimes the pages were blank except for jagged lines, like the panic had drawn itself onto paper. Other times, there were fragments of what she remembered, a smell of wet concrete, a flash of dark boots, the cold glint of metal. It was when she wrote down the phrase that had haunted her from the hospital. This wasn't how it was supposed to go, that she first noticed how deep the words cut, not into her body, but into her sense of self. Emily didn't just remember the words. She felt them like a lingering shadow curling around her chest. They weren't just words spoken in anger or triumph. They were a message, a signature, a purpose. She began sleeping with a knife under her pillow and a baseball bat by the door. She checked locks obsessively, changed routines, and even installed security cameras outside the house she had moved into temporarily. Yet despite all her precautions, a gnawing sense of inevitability remained. She knew somehow he hadn't forgotten her. Miles away, the man watched. He wasn't idle. not by instinct. His plans were never random, even when chaos made it appear so. He studied news articles, surveillance footage from the hospital release, public records, and anything that hinted at Emily's new location. It thrilled him, seeing her survive, seeing her fear. It was not about the kill anymore. Not entirely. It was about control, the psychological imprint, the way she had been imprinted by his presence. He repeated the phrase in his mind, over and over. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. It was not a defeat. It was a puzzle, a problem to be solved. And he always solved problems. He had been meticulous before. Meticulous to the point where every detail, every movement, every reaction of the family was calculated, predicted, studied. And when the girl had screamed, had resisted, had survived, it wasn't just failure. It was an anomaly that needed correcting. And anomalies, he knew, must be addressed. Emily started therapy sessions that were more intense. Dr. Reynolds began guided memory retrieval, attempting to untangle the fragmented recollections without overwhelming her. You're safe now, he would say. I don't feel safe, Emily would reply, voice barely audible. One day, during a session, her hands trembled as she described the last thing she saw before the man disappeared. The glint of his wristwatch in the moonlight, the way he moved with an almost clinical precision, and the echo of that voice. I remember it differently now, she whispered. He was disappointed, not angry, calm, but like I ruined something he had planned. Dr. Reynolds nodded. You're remembering emotional cues. That's important. That gives us insight into the type of person he is. Emily clenched her fists. I don't want insight. I want him gone. I want to stop thinking about him. But the thought wouldn't leave. It never left. Meanwhile, Detective Chun and her team began tracing the man's previous crimes. It was painstaking, a mosaic of disappearances and assaults across multiple states, each one eerily precise. There were patterns, homes with basements left unlocked, parents incapacitated before children, survivors who could barely remember their attacker. The investigation revealed something chilling. He wasn't just a serial killer. He was a predator who meticulously studied family dynamics, habits, and schedules. He knew how to dismantle a household from the inside out without leaving obvious signs. But there was no name, no identification. He left no personal trace. Only his message remained. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The team theorized that the repetition of the phrase was a psychological signature. But for Emily, it was more than a signature. It was a promise, a looming threat. One evening, Emily returned home from therapy and found the security footage blinking in a strange pattern. A single frame showed a shadow moving past the camera's range, too fleeting to identify clearly. She froze. Her stomach dropped. The man had found her. Not yet inside, not yet attacking, but he had located her. And now, she wasn't just surviving. She was being hunted. Her hands shook as she dialed Detective Chen's number. He knows where I am. Laura's voice was calm, but tense. We'll increase surveillance. You're not alone. But Emily, stay vigilant. He may test you. He may want to see if you're afraid. Fear, anger, paranoia. They twisted inside Emily, almost indistinguishable from each other. She realized she couldn't just hide. Not anymore. If he came again, she needed to be ready. The man, driving alone on the interstate, considered his next move. He didn't need to rush. This was a game of patience. He studied her patterns, the notes she kept, the security measures she installed. Each one was a challenge, an obstacle to overcome, a piece of the puzzle. When he finally smiled, it was subtle, almost imperceptible. She's improving, he murmured to himself. She remembers. She fears. Perfect. Emily began a regimen of training herself. Self-defense, mental conditioning, sleep exercises to reduce panic. Every morning she forced herself to remember that night, to let the fear rise and fall, to catalog it without being consumed. Her dreams were still haunted, but she no longer screamed first. She learned to watch, to wait, to study just as he did. A new determination settled in her chest. She wouldn't just survive. She would anticipate. She would confront. Detective Chin knew the window was closing. He was not just a murderer. He was a manipulator, a planner, a predator. And Emily, the first true survivor, had become both a target and a key to stopping him. This isn't going to end quietly, Laura said to herself, staring at the array of unsolved cases lining her office wall. And it's coming back for her. Emily, on the other hand, stared at the rain outside her window and whispered to herself, for the first time not entirely in fear, "If he thinks I'm hiding, he's wrong." Somewhere miles away, he smiled. The night had changed everything, but the game was far from over. The night had a rhythm of its own, one that Emily could no longer ignore. Every sound outside her window, every shadow crossing her yard, every wisp of the wind made her flinch, tense, calculating. The trauma of that night had carved new patterns into her mind. Hyper-awareness, rapid analysis, and instinctive paranoia that she could not switch off. She moved carefully through her apartment, checking doors and windows as if the locks themselves could sense what was coming. Her notebook lay open on the kitchen counter, pages filled with details she had recorded, sketches of the layout of the house she had left behind, patterns of the intruder's movements, every footstep she could remember. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was preparing. The sirens outside, once terrifying, now served as markers of a world moving around her, unaware of what was stalking her. She studied their echoes, timing the pauses between them, the angle of their wail, almost as if training herself to predict how sound traveled in space. It was obsessive. It was necessary. Miles away, the man was methodical as ever. His motel room was empty, sterile, a reflection of his mind. A single lamp cast long shadows across the walls as he reviewed the documents and digital files he compiled over weeks. Names, addresses, schedules, habits, all aligned like pieces in a sinister chess game. He paused on a map with tiny pins marking locations across multiple states, past victims, patterns, and unfinished attempts. The pin that represented Emily's new location glowed red under the dim light. "She's adapting," he said softly to himself, voice like a whisper in a cathedral. "She's learning." Perfect. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel frustration. He felt anticipation, the thrill of the hunt, the intellectual challenge, the game of shadows and whispers where only one outcome was expected, yet never guaranteed. The last attempt inefficient, he continued, fingers tracing the route he had taken. This time it must be flawless. He didn't plan to kill her immediately. Not yet. Not until he understood her. Until the dance had reached its crescendo. Emily began waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. Dreams of the intruder replaying themselves in distorted loops. She had started leaving lights on strategically, so shadows would fall where they could be observed, pathways monitored. The apartment was a maze of awareness, and yet it was still a prison. She started training herself physically. Punches, kicks, defensive maneuvers. She moved slowly through each exercise, focusing on muscle memory. Every motion repeated until it was instinct, until her body could react faster than fear could take hold. She was afraid, but she was learning to turn that fear into something else. Control. Detective Chun had recommended that she consider some form of protection, perhaps even police escort or surveillance. Emily refused. "No," she said firmly. "I can't live like that. Hiding. Waiting. That's what he wants. I need to face it, even if I don't see him coming." Laura Chin didn't argue. She only nodded, understanding the complexity of trauma, its subtle blend of fear, defiance, and obsession. The days grew longer, but the nights were endless. One evening, Emily was reviewing her notes when she noticed a small anomaly. Security footage had captured a shadow moving across the alley behind her building. Too faint to identify, but deliberate, calculated. The timing matched no delivery or maintenance schedules. Her breath caught in her throat. "He's watching," she whispered. Detective Chin was called immediately. A team was dispatched to review the footage. No one could identify the figure, but the movement, calculated, patient, purposeful, was unmistakable. Laura Chen's voice over the phone was calm but firm. "You were right, Emily. He's close. Don't confront him." Emily's hand tightened on the edge of the counter. "I won't run," she said softly. "I'll be ready The man observed from the shadows. He had been close for days, watching her routines, timing her habits, waiting for the perfect moment to make contact. But he didn't rush. He didn't act without precision. He studied her, noting her training, the locks, the improvised obstacles. It amused him how fear could evolve into defiance and how defiance could sharpen survival instincts. "She's changing," he murmured. "She's evolving. She could almost match me now, almost." He smiled faintly. Almost was not enough. The plan remained. Emily's preparations were extensive. She had modified her apartment with subtle traps, motion sensors, makeshift alarms, reflective surfaces that allowed her to see angles without being exposed. She practiced rapid escape routes, alternate exits, even improvised weapons. Every evening she ran drills as if rehearsing for a performance she feared was inevitable. But with every drill, every simulation, the dread grew. She could not ignore the knowledge that he was out there, watching, studying, planning. And one night, her worst fear manifested. The front door clicked, quietly, softly, just enough for her trained ears to hear. Her pulse surged. She froze mid-step, listening. Then footsteps on the stairs. Slow, methodical. Emily crouched behind the counter, heart hammering, eyes scanning the environment. Every training move, every instinct, every preparation converged in that moment. She waited, calculating, anticipating, measuring distance and timing. The shadow appeared at the edge of the hall. His silhouette was partially illuminated by the dim streetlight filtering through the window. He paused. Emily's breath hitched. She was close enough to strike, close enough to observe, close enough to finally confront him, not with fear but with intention. The man sensed her. He smiled, faintly, approvingly. "Impressive," he whispered. The dance had begun. Detective Chun and her team had been monitoring from a distance, tracking subtle movements around the building. They knew Emily was facing him. They were ready, but the situation was delicate. Any misstep could trigger the violence of that night again. Emily, however, was no longer the same girl. She had internalized every lesson, every fear, every preparation. She had transformed trauma into anticipation, panic into strategy. As the man moved forward, Emily readied herself, body coiled, senses sharp, mind racing with contingencies. It was no longer about survival alone. It was about the confrontation. And for the first time, she felt a surge of something she had thought buried forever. Power. Somewhere across the city, he whispered the phrase again, almost affectionately, almost reverently. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. But Emily was ready now. The night had changed everything. But this time, she would not be the passive victim. Emily's world had narrowed to a single point. The man in her apartment. Every sound, every shadow, every breath of air was charged with imminent danger. Her training, her preparation, her terror, all converged in that single heartbeat. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate, measured. She could feel the weight of his presence before she saw him. The shadows stretched across the hallway. And for the first time since that night, Emily didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She observed. He paused at the threshold of her living room, his figure partially illuminated by the dim streetlight, slipping through the blinds. His head tilted slightly, as if acknowledging her readiness. There was no rush in his movement. Everything about him was calculated, precise, predatory. "I knew you'd be ready," he said softly, voice like a cold wind. "Impressive." Emily's hands tightened around the makeshift weapon she had positioned nearby. Her breaths were steady, controlled. She had rehearsed this moment, visualized it, anticipated every possible movement. "You're not him," he continued, stepping forward. "You're different, stronger, smarter, almost worthy." Emily's heart raced. Worthy. The word set her teeth on edge. This wasn't just an attack anymore. It was personal. "I don't know what you want," she said, voice steady despite the terror that gnawed at her chest. "But it ends tonight." He laughed softly, not cruelly, not triumphantly, but in a way that chilled her to the bone. "Ends?" he asked. "No, Emily, it doesn't end. Not yet. We've been dancing for weeks. I've been watching you. learning you, waiting. And now the final step. The room seemed to shrink. Every corner darkened, shadows pressing in. Emily's eyes flicked from him to the exits, noting distances, potential escape routes, objects she could use. He moved with precision, closing the distance slowly. Each step was deliberate, confident. She stayed still, counting, calculating. Detective Chun and her team were monitoring from a distance. Cameras and sensors they had discreetly placed gave them a real-time feed. They could see the intruder, see Emily, and see the tension crackling like static electricity. Laura Chin spoke softly into her radio. Stay calm. Do not engage. Wait for the right moment. Emily knew she couldn't wait. Not anymore. The man reached the center of the room. Their eyes locked. There was no mask now, just the recognition of predator and prey. You remember me, he said. You remember everything you're afraid of. Emily's mind raced. She had trained for this. She had visualized every movement, every contingency. She lunged suddenly, throwing an object from the counter, not to hit him, but to test his reaction. He flinched just slightly. Enough. Emily grabbed the second object, a heavy metal lamp, and swung it with all her strength. It connected with his shoulder, staggering him back. He laughed again, but there was respect in it. He hadn't expected resistance like this. You're learning, he said, but not enough. They circled each other, predator and prey, each measuring the other. Emily's muscles burned with tension, adrenaline, fear, and focus. Every instinct screamed to attack, evade, survive. And then he made his move. Fast, efficient, calculated. The kind of move that left no margin for error. Emily anticipated it, stepping aside just in time. The force of his momentum sent a chair skidding across the floor. Glass shattered. Light flickered. She took a deep breath, heart hammering, and pressed an advantage. Her years of preparation, her months of anxiety, her sharpened reflexes, they all culminated in one sequence of movements designed for one purpose: survive. The man adapted quickly, shifting tactics. Every strike she made was met with countermoves that were almost too fast to follow. This was no ordinary criminal. This was someone who had perfected control, patience, calculation. Yet Emily refused to yield. Every strike, every dodge, every tactical movement was a declaration. She would not be a victim again. The standoff lasted only minutes, though it felt like hours. Then from outside, a signal. Laura Chun and her tactical unit were approaching, ready to intervene. The man knew it, Emily knew it. His expression didn't falter. This isn't over, he said, almost kindly, almost promising. And with a swift movement, he retreated, slipping through an exit Emily hadn't noticed before, a hidden door, a narrow path, a calculated escape route. Emily collapsed, shaking, blood pounding in her ears, tears streaming down her face. Relief, fear, adrenaline, anger, all mixed into a chaotic storm. She had survived. He had escaped. But the encounter had changed something fundamental. Detective Chin arrived moments later, securing the scene, checking Emily, ensuring she was unharmed. You were incredible, Laura said, voice steady, but her eyes sharp. He underestimated you. That's why he's alive. But he will return. And next time, he'll be more careful. Emily nodded, swallowing her fear, her resolve hardening. Then I'll be ready. Outside, the man vanished into the night, leaving only one thing behind: the certainty that this was far from over. And somewhere in the darkness, he whispered to himself, this wasn't how it was supposed to go yet. The night was still deceptively calm. Rain had stopped, leaving the city streets slick and reflective under the yellow glow of streetlights. Emily lay awake in her apartment, eyes open, listening. Every sound, every shift of air, every distant engine was a potential warning. She replayed the confrontation in her mind, movement by movement, predicting what he would do next. She had survived, yes, but only barely, and he had vanished. The man had not expected resistance, and that mistake, however small, would haunt him. Emily rose quietly, checking all locks again, scanning her surroundings with the precision of a trained observer. Her apartment had become a fortress of awareness. Nothing was left to chance. Yet, in the back of her mind, one thought gnawed relentlessly. He had not been defeated. He had only delayed. Miles away, the man sat in a dimly lit motel, surrounded by maps, files, and surveillance footage. Each document represented a life disrupted, a family destroyed, a pattern perfected. His eyes scanned Emily's routines, her jogs, her shopping trips, her therapy sessions. He knew every exit, every blind spot, every predictable behavior. "She's adapting," he murmured, almost approvingly. "Her fear has evolved. Her defiance is interesting, but predictable. I will adjust." He began planning his next move meticulously, calculating every contingency. This time, there would be no escape, no surviving witness. He would make it flawless. Hours passed. He reviewed footage repeatedly, noting patterns in her behavior. Even her training exercises, how she reacted, how she positioned herself, were studied. Every adaptation she made only made him more intrigued. The hunt had become a psychological challenge, a puzzle. Emily's paranoia intensified. She began varying her routines, taking different routes of therapy, leaving and entering at odd hours, monitoring shadows with reflective surfaces she had installed. She trained relentlessly, muscles memorizing movements, reflexes sharpening. Sleep became a luxury. Each night, she practiced drills silently, imagining an intruder at each entrance, testing herself, testing the limits of fear. She didn't allow panic to take her. She converted it into readiness, control. Her notebook filled with observations, sketches, and contingency plans. Emily understood now. This was no longer just about survival. This was about preemption. She had to anticipate him, understand his psychology, stay one step ahead, or risk everything. Detective Chun remained a constant presence, monitoring from a safe distance. Cameras, GPS trackers, and neighborhood surveillance were set in place. Laura knew the man would return. She knew his meticulous nature would lead him to test Emily, to probe, to intimidate. "You need to stay sharp," Laura warned over the phone one evening. "This is his signature. He studies patterns, learns weaknesses. Every movement you make is data to him. Don't give him anything unnecessary." Emily nodded. "I won't." And she didn't. Days passed. Nothing happened. No shadows. No movement outside her apartment. Emily's vigilance never waned, but doubt crept in. Was he really gone? Or was he watching silently, biding his time, waiting for her defenses to falter? She continued training, but now she added psychological preparation, mental visualization of potential confrontations, anticipating attacks, testing her fear response. She studied his previous behavior, predicting strategies, methods, and timing. Every night, she rehearsed escape routes, defensive maneuvers, improvised attacks. She became a shadow herself, silent, careful, controlled. The man, meanwhile, grew impatient. Watching Emily adapt so quickly disturbed him, yet fascinated him. The pattern she was creating, resistance, anticipation, was unlike previous targets. He realized he had underestimated her. He began planning differently, more subtly, less direct, psychological probes rather than physical strikes. Notes left anonymously, shadows glimpsed just enough to be noticed, items slightly moved. Small disturbances designed to unsettle, to test, to learn. Every subtle act was data. Every reaction she made was information. Emily noticed. The first anomaly was minor. A chair slightly out of place, a shadow just beyond the camera's field of view. Then came subtle sounds. Floorboards creaking when no one should be there, the faint tapping of an object against the window ledge. She cataloged everything. Notes, sketches, timestamps. Every signal. Every irregularity became part of her growing mental map of his intrusion methods. And then came the unmistakable evidence. A message scrawled in condensation on her bathroom mirror. Almost ready. Her heart froze. He had entered. He had observed her, traced her routines, penetrated her defenses, and left a deliberate sign. Emily read it over and over. Each word carried threat and fascination. He was close. Closer than she had anticipated. Detective Chin arrived moments later. Laura reviewed the security footage with Emily, showing subtle movements in the camera feed. Shadows shifting, a glint of metallic reflection in the hallway. "He's watching," Emily whispered. "He want me to know he's here." Laura nodded. "Exactly. This is what he does. He's testing you, trying to make you react. Don't." Emily's lips pressed tightly together. She refused to flinch. She would not give him the satisfaction. That night, Emily set up her environment like a battlefield. Furniture strategically positioned, reflective surfaces angled, traps and improvised alarms in place. She rehearsed her escape routes silently, every muscle primed, every reflex ready. Hours passed. Shadows stretched and shifted. Silence pressed against her ears. And then a sound. Footsteps. Soft, calculated, just outside her apartment door. Emily's breath slowed, heart steady. She had waited for this. She had prepared for this. Every moment of fear, every sleepless night, every training session had led to this instant. The cat-and-mouse game had begun in earnest. Somewhere in the dark, the man smiled faintly. He had found her, and for the first time, he realized she would not simply run. The stage was set. Emily, vigilant, prepared, ready. The man, patient, obsessed, relentless. Detective Chun and her team, close, watching, waiting. And in the silence of the night, both predator and prey understood the truth. This was no longer a simple attack. This was a war of minds, a test of wills. And only one side could emerge unbroken. The night had thickened into a velvet darkness. The city muted under a crescent moon. Every streetlight seemed a distant star, flickering against the wet asphalt. Inside her apartment, Emily's senses were razor sharp. Every shadow, every creak of the floor, every distant car engine registered in her mind as a potential threat. The confrontation had been inevitable. She had waited for this moment, prepared for it, trained herself for it. Every drill, every visualization, every sleepless night had led to this one instant. Outside her door, soft footsteps approached. Slow, deliberate, confident. Each step was calculated. The intruder had returned. Emily's heartbeat didn't race. It didn't pound. Her mind was a map of contingency plans, escape routes, and defensive strategies. Her body coiled like a spring. Every nerve was primed. She was ready. The door handle rattled lightly. Testing. He had done this before, probing for fear, looking for reaction. Emily waited. Then the door opened just a fraction. He stepped inside. No hesitation. No mask. Just the cold, calculated gaze of a predator who had never met resistance like this. "I knew you'd be ready," he whispered, almost approvingly. "But I wonder how ready?" Emily didn't answer. She didn't move. Her eyes tracked every inch of his figure. Every subtle twitch, every shadow, every intent revealed itself through posture and movement. He advanced slowly, each step controlled, testing. Emily sprang. The first strike was a feint, aimed to unbalance him, but he countered instantly, pivoting with the ease of someone who had studied violence for years. Their movements were a deadly dance, choreographed by instinct and training. Objects flew, lamps, chairs, a vase shattered against the wall. Glass and wood splintered, reflecting the chaos of the moment. Yet Emily's focus never wavered. Every strike, every block, every dodge was calculated. He lunged, fast, almost too fast to see. Emily sidestepped, using his momentum against him, pushing him into the wall. Pain shot through her arms and legs from exertion, but she ignored it. This was survival, pure and unfiltered. For a moment, they froze, eyes locked. The predator and the survivor, two forces colliding. "You've changed," he said, voice low. "Stronger than I expected. Clever, determined, almost impressive." Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. "I survived once. I won't let you win this time." The fight resumed with renewed intensity. Each movement was faster, more desperate. Emily ducked, rolled, struck, and parried. He attacked with precision, but she anticipated, adjusted, countered. The room became a battleground, a whirlwind of motion, noise, and fear. The past, The terror of the night she had survived fueled her strength. She was no longer the frightened girl hiding in a closet. She was a force honed by trauma, fear, and resolve. From outside, Detective Chun and his team waited, monitoring every camera, every sensor. They knew intervention was close, but needed to avoid a premature strike. This was Emily's fight as much as his. A test of will. The man realized the intervention would come soon. He paused, considering the situation. For the first time, he hesitated. Emily took that moment. She launched herself forward, striking his chest with the full weight of her body, sending him staggering back. He recovered quickly, but she had found the opening she needed. A narrow gap, a route he hadn't anticipated, a chance to push him toward the exit hall. Detective Chen's team moved silently through the building, tactical units converging. The man sensed the trap and tried to flee, but Emily intercepted, forcing him to stumble. He cursed under his breath, impressed and frustrated. "You've learned well," he admitted, "but we're not done." Emily didn't speak. She pressed the advantage, keeping him off balance, anticipating every move. Her fear was gone, replaced by a sharp, icy focus. She struck again and again, until finally he was cornered, trapped by both her and the approaching officers. Detective Chan and his team moved in, weapons drawn. The man raised his hands, smirking slightly, acknowledging defeat. Not humiliation, not fear, but respect for the skill she had shown. Emily stepped back, breathing hard, muscles trembling, but victorious. She had faced him directly, controlled her fear, and survived, not as prey, but as a strategist, a fighter, a survivor in every sense. Handcuffs clicked. The man was restrained. Silence descended on the room, broken only by Emily's ragged breathing and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Detective Chin approached her. "You did this," he said. "You survived. You fought. You controlled the situation." Emily nodded, still shaking, tears streaming. "I didn't just survive. I wasn't going to let him win." For the first time since that night, she allowed herself a small measure of relief. Outside, news crews would later report on the capture of a meticulous predator who had terrorized families across multiple states. But inside, Emily knew the truth. The night that had changed everything was over, not because someone else had intervened, but because she had faced the darkness herself and won. And in the quiet aftermath, as the city slept, she whispered to herself, "I am not afraid anymore." The sun rose slowly over the city, spilling muted gold across wet streets. The night of terror was over, yet Emily's world had shifted irreversibly. Her apartment, once a battleground, now felt alien, too quiet, too still. Every object, every shadow, reminded her of the confrontation, the predator, and the violence she had endured and survived. Detective Lorichin arrived early, even before Emily opened her eyes. The office was buzzing with activity, reports being filed, evidence cataloged, and investigators discussing the captured suspect. Despite the procedural chaos, Laura focused on Emily, who sat quietly, notebook in hand, tracing the edges of her memories in sketches and observations. "You did more than survive," Laura said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You helped us catch him. You helped stop this from happening again." Emily nodded slowly. I just knew what I had to do. I couldn't let him, not again." Laura didn't argue. She had seen Emily's meticulous preparation, her mental fortitude, and her instinctive skill during the confrontation. Emily had survived because she had anticipated every move, calculated every possibility, and transformed fear into strategy. The investigation after the arrest revealed the chilling depth of the man's crimes. He had terrorized multiple families across states, leaving patterns of psychological manipulation, terror, and physical harm. Investigators pored over his files, maps, and digital records, tracing every movement, every surveillance video, every subtle intrusion. Emily's testimony became pivotal. Her observations, her sketches, and her recollections of the night provided insight into the suspect's patterns, methods, and psychological profile. Her ability to remain composed and analytical under trauma became crucial in constructing the case against him. Court documents revealed a methodical predator, a man who studied his victims, planned meticulously, and adapted to obstacles with calculated precision. Forensic psychologists testified about his obsessive need for control and the psychological games he played with survivors. Emily had faced him directly and survived, a rare and significant anomaly in his history. Emily began therapy in earnest, focusing not only on trauma recovery, but also on processing the confrontation, understanding the predator's psychology, and reclaiming her sense of safety. She worked with Dr. Reynolds on grounding exercises, cognitive behavioral techniques, and controlled exposure to triggers to reduce panic and hypervigilance. Months passed. Emily's nights were no longer dominated by recurring dreams or nightmares. Shadows no longer held the same power over her. She had transformed fear into awareness and trauma into resilience. She revisited her notes frequently, but now with a sense of control rather than obsession. Each sketch, each observation, became a record of her growth rather than a lingering map of terror. The courtroom proceedings were intense. Emily attended with Laura Chun, the team of detectives, and her family, her aunt who had taken her in, supporting her through months of uncertainty. The trial revealed the full extent of the man's crimes. Survivors testified, corroborating Emily's account of his methodology. Expert witnesses detailed his psychological profile, emphasizing his meticulous planning, obsessive control, and patterns of victim selection. Emily's testimony was calm, clear, and methodical. She described the confrontation, the subtle movements she observed, and the tactics he used. Her ability to recall the encounter in detail, without succumbing to emotional distortion, impressed both the jury and the court. During cross-examination, the defense attempted to portray the man as mentally unstable, impulsive, or unplanned in his attacks. Emily's recollection, however, painted a different picture, a controlled, calculating predator who had studied and manipulated her environment. Her poise and precision in recounting the events became central to the prosecution's argument. Her survival was no accident. It was evidence of her acute awareness and courage, demonstrating the calculated nature of the defendant's crimes. Outside the courtroom, media coverage painted Emily as a figure of resilience. Headlines highlighted her bravery, her strategic thinking, and her survival. While she avoided direct publicity, she understood the power of her story, a testament to courage, awareness, and the human ability to reclaim control from terror. Detective Chun maintained professional distance, but supported Emily in private, recognizing the enormous psychological and emotional load she had carried. The investigation had revealed not only the extent of the man's crimes, but also the systemic challenges in tracking such methodical predators. Emily's observations provided a roadmap for understanding and preventing similar cases in the future. Months later, the verdict came. Guilty on all counts, multiple charges of murder, attempted murder, and unlawful confinement. The court imposed a life sentence without parole, emphasizing the calculated cruelty and obsessive planning evident in the crimes. Emily attended the sentencing quietly. The man, now restrained, displayed the same cold calm, yet his eyes betrayed an acknowledgement. She had survived, resisted, and thwarted his plans. The judge's final words resonated in the courtroom. Justice has been served, but the bravery of one survivor has prevented further tragedy. This case is a reminder of the vigilance, courage, and resilience that can emerge even in the darkest of times. Emily returned home afterward. The apartment, once a place of terror, now felt safe. She allowed herself moments of reflection, without panic. She began pursuing a life beyond survival. Part-time work, rebuilding connections with family, and participating in support groups for survivors of violent crimes. Her notebook, once a tactical record, became a journal of growth, reflection, and resilience. She recorded not just memories of fear, but lessons learned, moments of courage, and insights into human psychology. Detective Chun remained in contact, offering guidance when needed, acknowledging Emily's unique contribution to the case. Her insights into the predator psychology, preparation, and confrontation were invaluable to ongoing investigations into similar offenders. In time, Emily began speaking at closed sessions for law enforcement and survivor support programs. She shared her experience, emphasizing awareness, preparation, and psychological resilience. Her story was not sensationalized. It was a tool, a lesson, a guide for navigating the aftermath of trauma and facing threats with calculated strength. The memory of the predator remained, but it no longer dominated her life. She had reclaimed control, reshaped fear into strategy, and transformed vulnerability into empowerment. And while the shadows of that night would never fully disappear, Emily walked forward, not as a victim, but as a survivor who turned terror into triumph, observation into insight, and fear into enduring strength. The years passed quietly, but Emily's life was no longer quiet in the sense of fear. It was quiet in the sense of resolution. The shadows of that night, the predator, the confrontation, and the months of investigation lingered in memory, but they no longer dictated her life. They had become chapters of survival, courage, and resilience. Emily moved into a new apartment, carefully chosen, but without paranoia dictating her choices. She allowed herself small luxuries: plants on the windowsill, a favorite chair by the sunlight in the morning, a coffee mug she had bought on impulse. Life had begun to feel ordinary again, ordinary in a way that was precious and hard-earned. She continued therapy, not because she was broken, but because she recognized the importance of maintaining awareness and mental clarity. Dr. Reynolds often reminded her that healing was not linear and that trauma, once experienced, never fully disappears, but it can coexist with growth, courage, and normalcy. Emily's journal, once filled with tactical sketches and defensive strategies, now held reflections, insights, and even plans for future. She wrote about resilience, about how fear could be transformed into preparation and clarity, and about the strange, powerful knowledge that surviving trauma gave her strength she never thought she would have. The legal proceedings against the man continued even after his sentencing. Appeals, procedural reviews, and expert testimonies occupied courtrooms, but the case had set precedents for handling meticulous predators. Law enforcement credited Emily's detailed observations and psychological insight as a turning point in the investigation, helping prevent potential future crimes. Detective Laura Chin remained a guiding presence in Emily's life, though now more as a mentor than protector. They occasionally spoke, discussing survivor support programs, criminal psychology, and the lessons learned from the case. Emily often provided input on training materials, sharing her experience to educate both officers and survivors about preparedness, vigilance, and psychological resilience. Emily also began reconnecting with her community. She volunteered with groups focused on crime survivors, speaking at closed workshops about awareness, preparation, and coping strategies. She emphasized not fear, but knowledge, empowerment, and careful observation. Her story became a tool, not for sensationalism, but for education. Even casual conversations often touched on resilience. She would smile softly, sometimes pausing before answering. People didn't realize the weight behind her eyes, an awareness forged by surviving the unimaginable, but they recognized clarity, the calm, and the quiet confidence she exuded. Nighttime still brought dreams, but they were no longer torturous. Shadows no longer leapt from corners. Instead, her mind processed memories with clarity, framing them as lessons rather than threats. She sometimes wrote in her journal before bed, recounting her day, noting any lingering unease, and reminding herself of the strength she had developed. She had regained autonomy over her mind, her body, and her life. Fear no longer dictated her movements. It had been transformed into awareness, instinct, and resilience. The predator's shadow still existed in memory, but it no longer reached into her daily life. One quiet evening, Emily walked along a park path, watching children play and couples stroll. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows, but the warmth of the day and the ordinary beauty of life filled her with peace. She reflected on the journey, from terror to confrontation, from fear to preparation, and from survival to empowerment. She realized that while the night had changed everything, it had also forged something profound within her: courage, insight, and the knowledge that she could face darkness and emerge stronger. Her phone buzzed. A message from Detective Chun. "Case files archived. You helped more than you know. Proud of you." Emily smiled softly and typed back, "Thank you for everything. Life moves on, and so do we." She pocketed her phone and continued walking. The wind whispered through the trees, carried with it the promise of future she had earned, a life reclaimed from fear, a mind strengthened by survival, and a spirit unbroken by the darkness it had faced. The night had indeed changed everything, but in its aftermath, Emily had found not just survival, but a life filled with strength, insight, and quiet power. She was no longer the girl who had hidden in a closet. She was a survivor, a thinker, a guide, and a witness to her own resilience. And for the first time in years, she felt truly free.